Ouch. Stop it. Somebody help me. My mother-in-law Julia suddenly barged into my room during a virtual meeting. I had a bad feeling, and it was right. George, who was also in the meeting, sighed all on the screen as Julia grabbed me and tried to overpower me. Cold sweat ran down my body. Please stop. I pleaded with my eyes, but Julia ignored me completely. I struggled to push her away, but in the scuffle, I was knocked down, hitting my head hard. In the next moment, Julia lit a flame on a lighter she was holding. Suddenly, I heard someone shout through my computer, "I'm calling the police." What? Julia froze, looking up in shock. She hadn't realized her deranged actions were being live-streamed. My name is May. I've been married for 2 years now. I met my husband, George, at work. He's in sales, and I work in the technical department. After the pandemic hit, our department switched to remote work, and now we only go to the office a few times a month. Our apartment is really close to the office, so commuting isn't an issue. But George still goes into work every day because of his job. It makes sense, considering his responsibilities in sales. We don't live with Julia, but she lives nearby and comes over to our place all the time. Ever since my father-in-law passed away 2 years ago, she's been coming by more frequently, and she always finds something to complain about. I try to avoid her, but she still shows up just to criticize me. It's exhausting. What started as once-a-week visits have now increased to 2 or 3 times a week. The worst part is, she comes over while I'm working, barging into my home office. She stands behind me, saying things like, "Can you really call this working?" Or, "You need to be more serious about your job." To block out her voice, I started playing loud music while I worked, but it's only making it harder for me to focus. Can you please talk to Julia? Ask her to be a little quieter. One night, after George got home, I finally worked up the courage to ask him, but he just laughed it off. "Don't worry about it. Mom doesn't mean any harm. She's just concerned about you, that's all." His response weighed heavily on my heart. If she's really concerned, why does she keep belittling my work? And why doesn't George understand how I feel? But it's hard for me to hear the same thing over and over again. I'm trying my best. Even after saying that, George didn't seem to take it seriously. Mom's been tough on me since I was a kid. She's just continuing what she's always done, but it's because she cares about us. As I listened to his words, I felt like something wasn't right. The fact that Julia was strict when raising him doesn't justify her constant jabs and criticisms toward me. Even if I pointed that out, I knew George wouldn't understand. Every time Julia visits our house, she transforms into a doting mother, sweet and gentle, when she's around her beloved son. The same woman who throws harsh words at me, almost like a devil in disguise, softens her face and becomes a completely different person in front of George. "George, you must have had a tough day at work," she says with an impossibly sweet voice, smiling as if I don't even exist. The sickeningly sweet tone of her voice sends a shiver down my spine. I can keep going because Mom's always there for me. George replies without a second thought, like a child basking in his mother's affection. What is this scene? This can't be real. And every time, I feel a little more disillusioned inside. I can't understand why her attitude shifts so drastically. When I watch the two of them, it feels like I've been left behind, like I don't belong in their world at all. But honestly, I don't even want to be a part of that world. Even after Julia leaves, the cloying sweetness of her voice lingers in my ears, and the unsettling sense of discomfort grows. Why am I the only one who has to deal with this? I can't help but sigh in frustration. The fact that George doesn't notice anything only deepens my unease. As Julia's behavior escalates day by day, I'm starting to feel desperate, knowing I have to do something about this situation. But George remains oblivious, and it's as if he's downplaying my suffering. With every visit, Julia's presence weighs heavier and heavier on my heart. I've reached the point where just hearing the sound of her coming into the room makes my chest tighten with anxiety. Why am I the only one who has to endure this? I'm terrified that if things continue like this, I'm going to break. One evening, when Julia visited as usual, I felt like I had reached my limit. The moment she started criticizing my work again, I stood up and faced her directly. "Julia, I'm sorry, but could you please stop coming over during my work hours? I can't focus, and it's affecting my job performance, which is causing problems for my company." I tried to speak in as calm a voice as I could, but inside, I was boiling with anger. Julia looked slightly surprised at first, but then she quickly curled her lips into a smile. "Yes, work is important, isn't it? I understand. I'll be more mindful from now on." Thank you." Her unexpected response caught me off guard, but I had a feeling that Julia didn't truly understand. It felt like she was hiding something behind that smile. Despite her words, Julia's visits continued, and the passive-aggressive remarks didn't stop. My resolve to find a way to break free from this situation only grew stronger, but without any solution in sight. I was wearing down more and more each day. Eventually, I began to realize that solving this on my own was going to be difficult. Unless George took my side, the dynamic with Julia wouldn't improve. But when he would finally wake up and see what was happening, that I couldn't predict. Julia's harassment escalated with each passing day. What started as complaints soon morphed into her barging into my workspace, the bedroom, and rudely touching my furniture and documents. Honestly, it was becoming a major source of stress. But I kept telling myself I just had to endure it, because there didn't seem to be any other option. One day, Julia entered my room again. As usual, she made snide remarks while surveying the space, but then her eyes locked onto a cabinet with a lock. "Hey, what's in there?" "Nothing important. Just work materials I need to store." "If it's just work materials, why's it locked? Tell me." Julia raised her voice and tried to force the cabinet open. I panicked and tried to stop her. "Julia, there are important things in there. Please don't touch it. If it's really that important, then you should show me. What are you hiding in there? You're only keeping it locked because it's something you can't show me, right?" Julia completely ignored me and kept trying to open the cabinet. "Oh my God. Stop it already. This has nothing to do with you," I pleaded desperately. Julia finally withdrew her hand after staring at the cabinet for what felt like forever, but she kept glancing at it like it was still on her mind. But it didn't end there. Julia's harassment escalated even further, throwing things, and sometimes even acting as if she might raise her hand against me. "What are you doing, Julia? Stop it, please," I repeated over and over, but Julia's bizarre behavior didn't stop. One day, Julia suddenly grabbed my shoulder and started shaking me violently. "Why won't you listen to me more?" "What? I'm not a child. I haven't done anything wrong. Do you really think that excuse is going to work?" I could have easily shaken off her grip, but I feared that if I made a scene and exaggeratedly fell, she would accuse me of something afterward. So I hesitated, feeling trapped. I was getting closer and closer to my breaking point, and then the worst happened. That day, I was attending a virtual meeting like usual. George was also in the meeting from his office. Suddenly, Julia barged into the room. I felt a sense of dread and glanced at her. Without hesitation, she made a beeline for the cabinet. "No, Julia, stop." I tried to plead with my eyes, but of course, Julia wasn't going to be swayed by that. That day, there was something off about her. Her eyes, she wasn't in her right mind. Something was seriously wrong. "George, help!" I yelled to George, hoping he would hear me through the screen. Immediately, George's tense voice came from the other side of the virtual meeting. "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay? What's happening?" "George, Julia's." I tried to explain the situation, but before I could finish, Julia grabbed the cabinet and, in the next instant, pulled a lighter and a bottle of oil from her pocket. "No way. Stop." I was trembling with fear. Then George's voice rang out again. "Hey, what is she doing? Stop her, now." But Julia wasn't responding. No, she wasn't hearing him at all. Without reacting to George's shouts, she opened the oil can and started pouring it all over the cabinet. At that moment, I was consumed by both terror and fury. I shot up from my chair and ran toward Julia. "Stop it." I grabbed her arm, desperately trying to make her stop. But Julia pushed me away, preventing me from getting close. We struggled, and in the chaos, I lost my balance and fell hard to the floor, hitting my head. "Ah, it hurts." As I lay there in pain, I saw Julia light the lighter and bring it toward the cabinet. In an instant, the flames engulfed it, and the room began to fill with smoke. "Somebody help." With my head spinning and my vision fading, I screamed in despair. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear George's voice again. "Damn it, I'm coming there right now. What's going on? What's happening over there?" I could hear George's colleagues in the virtual meeting, trying to make sense of the situation through the screen. "It's a fire. Get out of there, now," someone shouted, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear and shock, my entire body rigid. "Julia, please, just stop," I begged, using the last of my strength. But she wasn't listening at all. "Now you see. You're not cut out for work. You don't need any of this." Her words filled me with despair, a surge of anger and sadness rising so quickly that I momentarily forgot the pain. I forced myself to stand and grabbed a blanket, trying to smother the flames, but the fire was much stronger than I anticipated, rapidly consuming the blanket and spreading across the room. "Please, just go out. Please, go out." I prayed silently, desperately trying to put out the fire. Eventually, I managed to extinguish the flames, but the room reeked of smoke, and the cabinet was nothing more than charred remains. Exhausted, I collapsed to the floor, trembling from the pain in my head and the emotional turmoil. "This is what happens when you defy me. Maybe now you'll learn to listen," Julia said coldly, her smile twisted in satisfaction. Just then, footsteps echoed from the hallway, and George burst into the room. "What the hell happened?" He rushed to my side, his eyes widening at the sight of the scorched cabinet. All of the important documents inside were destroyed. "Mom, what did you do?" George turned to Julia, but she just stared blankly into space, not reacting. Then suddenly, a voice blared through the speakers of my laptop. "I'm calling the police," someone from the virtual meeting had shouted. "What?" Julia snapped back to reality, her eyes darting around in confusion. Her expression shifted rapidly, from confusion to fear, and finally to anger. She froze for a few moments, but then her usual bravado returned. "Why is this happening? How could it come to this?" she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "What are you doing, Mom?" George yelled, his face a mix of panic and fury as he glared at her. He stepped toward Julia, his anger boiling over. No, George, it's not like that. It's just that woman was being so disrespectful. Julia stammered, struggling to find the right words. She glanced at me briefly before turning back to George. Disrespectful? What did May even do? Do you have any idea how dangerous and unacceptable your actions are, Mom? But you don't know what she said to me, George. I was only trying to do this for you. Shut up. Just stop talking, Mom. George shouted, his voice booming through the room. Julia froze, the words catching in her throat. Her face, once defiant, now looked scared, like a child reprimanded. She stood there, speechless. George, I was just, she stammered. I don't want to hear any more excuses, Mom. George cut her off, his voice stern and unwavering. What you did, no matter the reason, is unforgivable. Julia's face went pale at his words, her lips trembling as she stood there in shock. She clearly did not understand how everything had spiraled so far out of control. George, don't speak to me like that. You've never raised your voice at me before. Why are you doing this? It's because of her, isn't it? I was only trying to. Enough with the excuses. George's gaze was icy, filled with frustration. What you did, Mom, is a crime. You need to realize that. At his words, Julia's face crumbled. She finally understood the gravity of the situation. Tears began streaming down her face as she covered it with her hands, her sobs breaking the heavy silence in the room. Why? Why did it come to this? Julia's wails echoed, but George only looked down at her coldly. Why? This is all because of you, Mom. George shouted, his anger and disbelief clear as he glared at her. Julia, stunned into silence, seemed to freeze like ice, unable to respond. For a moment, the room was silent again. I collapsed to the floor, my head throbbing in pain, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Tears welled up in my eyes as the emotional weight of the situation crushed me. I never imagined Julia could do something like this. Someone, call an ambulance. George shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. Colleagues from the virtual meeting reacted immediately. Even from the distance, I could hear them. Help is already on the way. Someone yelled from the other side of the screen. Within minutes, the paramedics and police arrived. Julia didn't resist as they arrested her. She looked confused, as if she still didn't fully comprehend what was happening. Why me? Julia mumbled softly, but no one was listening to her anymore. Later, I learned that my colleagues had noticed something was wrong during the meeting and immediately called the police. Their quick action had saved me from a life-threatening situation. I'm so sorry. George sat beside me, his voice breaking as he fought back tears. I never imagined Mom would do something like this. His remorse was clear in his eyes. George. I held George's hand. I'm glad you realized what was happening, but what are we going to do now? The room is burnt. And Julia, the house can be renovated. As for Mom, I'll take care of it. But first, we need to focus on getting you the treatment you need, George said firmly, nodding as if to reassure me. That night, I received treatment at the hospital and learned that my injuries weren't life-threatening. But inside, the emotional scars ran deep. Where did Julia's hatred and resentment toward me come from? What pushed her to such an extreme? I couldn't understand it. The important thing is, from now on, I'll protect you, May. Those words from George were my only solace. After Julia's arrest, our lives completely changed. The police conducted a thorough investigation of the burnt shelves and room, and then we were asked to accompany them to the station. There, we were questioned separately, detailing the harassment Julia had subjected me to. "How did you feel when Julia set the fire with the lighter?" the detective asked. And for a moment, I was at a loss for words. I felt fear and despair. I couldn't understand why she hated me so much. I replied, my voice breaking as tears began to fall. The terror of that moment when Julia lit the fire kept flashing in my mind during the entire questioning process. George was also questioned. He was equally shocked by his mom's actions, and he explained everything to the police with a calm but determined demeanor. "I never thought Mom had gone this far. I should have realized how much my wife was suffering earlier," he said, and his face worn with exhaustion. For a while after that, we experienced a period of calm. Life returned to a peaceful routine, but that peace was short-lived. I received a call from George one day, informing me that Julia had been released. It had only been a few months since the fire. The news came on a quiet afternoon. It was when I was taking a break, enjoying a cup of coffee in the middle of my workday. But the phone call shattered that calm in an instant. "She's being released," George said. "What? Already?" As soon as the call ended, the anxiety that had been buried deep inside me for so long surged up like a tidal wave. The possibility that Julia would get out of prison was something I hadn't dared to consider. No, it was something I didn't want to consider. I thought I'd never have to see Julie again. I believed that. My voice was surprisingly calm, but the weight of my words felt heavier than I could have anticipated. When George came home later that day, I could see the same fear reflected in his eyes. "After everything she did, and she's already being released." George sat beside me, letting out a heavy sigh as he stared silently at the ceiling. We hadn't truly believed the terror from that day was fully behind us, but we thought Julia would stay in prison for a while. We never imagined she'd be back so soon. The small sense of relief I had been holding onto quickly crumbled away. "She must have faced some consequences. I'd like to think she's learned something," I murmured, glancing at George for his reaction. He closed his eyes for a moment, deep in thought, and when he opened them, he shook his head slowly at me. "I don't know. Mom's always been stubborn. She might not change that easily." There was a deep disappointment in his voice, along with a sense of responsibility for driving me into this mess. I could only nod silently in agreement. Once again, we were confronted with a harsh reality that felt inescapable. A few days later, we heard an unbelievable rumor. Neighbors were saying that Julia was going around telling people she was the victim. My son's wife framed me. I didn't do anything. When I heard that, it wasn't anger that rose up inside me. It was disbelief and a profound sense of disappointment. Instead of reflecting on what she had done, Julia was trying to justify herself and paint me as the villain. "I can't believe she's still saying that," I muttered. Julia had committed a serious crime, arson. That was an undeniable fact. Yet, she refused to acknowledge it and was spreading lies to the people around her. I was utterly fed up with her. George, sitting next to me, furrowed his brow in disbelief and let out a deep sigh. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Everything Mom did is documented, and the evidence from the arson is solid. We've even got the footage from the virtual meeting." He spoke with determination. He was right. On the day of the incident, the virtual meeting had recorded the moment Julia started the fire. All the coworkers who had been in that meeting witnessed it, and their testimony would surely hold up. Calmly, I added, "We have no choice but to use that footage and go back to the police. If Julia keeps spreading lies, we can't just sit by and do nothing." After talking it over, we decided to inform our relatives and neighbors of the truth. We couldn't allow Julia's lies and malice to continue unchecked. It was time to present the facts, supported by undeniable evidence. A few days later, we gathered the footage from the virtual meeting and began explaining everything to our relatives and neighbors. The video clearly showed the moment Julia grabbed my hand and set fire to the shelves. We also shared the statements from my coworkers, who had witnessed the entire event. Julia initially lashed out, claiming it was all fabricated, but gradually, her confidence faded and signs of panic became evident. "It's got to be forged," she shouted and glared at us desperately, but we remained composed. George looked at her calmly and said, "Mom, you can't keep denying the truth. Anyone who's seen the footage knows what happened. Keeping up this lie is only hurting yourself." Julia fell silent for a moment. Her face paled as if seized by fear. Finally, she sank into a chair, defeated, whispering, "This wasn't supposed to happen." Tears welled up in her eyes. She began to grasp the consequences of her actions. Yet, something still didn't sit right with me. I couldn't understand what had driven her to such hatred, but we resolved that we'd no longer yield to Julia's lies and malice. Though this ordeal had left deep scars, George and I were determined to protect the truth. Now, a few weeks later, I'm beginning to regain my composure. Julia's admission of guilt has stirred long-suppressed emotions within me. They are not of anger or sorrow, but of calm resolve. As I watched her face cloud with regret, I prepared the words I knew I needed to say. Whatever her motives, for the sake of our family, we had to cut ties. The time had come to discuss what lay ahead with George. One evening, I called him to the living room to talk. The quiet night felt as though it demanded a heavy decision from us. "George, what should we do from here?" "You mean about Mom, right?" His voice was weary, but he began speaking right away. "Honestly, it might be safest to leave things to the police." I nodded. Julia had threatened our family. The risk of her acting out again wasn't zero. Yet a part of me felt a complex conflict. Yes, Julia's actions were dangerous, but perhaps, somewhere along the way, she too had become broken. The tears and regret she had shown lingered in my mind. If we do turn her over to the police, what happens next? To be honest, I'm afraid of what could come of that. I expressed my honest feelings. George was silent for a while, deep in thought, before finally speaking quietly. "To be honest, I feel conflicted about Mom too. After everything she did, part of me still feels something for her, but that doesn't mean we can keep her in our lives." "Yes, I feel the same. Maybe it's best to leave things to the police to prevent any further harm from Julia. But is that really the choice that would make us happiest?" I trailed off, unable to continue. Cutting Julia off completely might bring us peace, but involving the police didn't feel like the best solution. Even if we don't turn her over to the police, I'm done with her. I don't want to give her any more opportunity to interfere in our lives. It's the safest way. Cutting ties. Yes, I'm also afraid of any further involvement with Julia. As true as that is. We sat in silence, deep in thought, amid the conflicting emotions toward Julia. A clear path gradually emerged. The decision to cut all ties with her rather than escalate things legally. "All right, we won't go to the police. Bud whatever she says. We'll have no further contact with her. That's the final decision." Yes, that's it. Cutting ties completely with Julia is the only way to prevent her from disrupting our lives any further. With that, we finally reached a resolution. We hoped this choice would bring us a new sense of peace. We prepared for one last meeting to formally tell Julia of our decision. This would end it all. I invited Julia to the house, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Julia. Julia looked at me, responding to my voice with a weary expression. Regret was evident on her face, and it seemed as though something had broken within her. She still seemed unsettled, though her eyes held a glimmer of hope, perhaps thinking she might still be forgiven. We won't be involving the police any further. Julia's face relaxed at those words. Her shoulders dropped with a sense of relief. She had likely thought she was completely forgiven, but I knew she hadn't understood the gravity of the situation yet. I also knew how much weight my next words carried. Oh, thank you, May. I can't take any more suffering. I'm so sorry. I really am, she said. But I calmly, firmly, continued with the next words. But Julia, don't misunderstand. What? Her relief vanished instantly, her face tightening with tension once again. Watching her expression change, I met her gaze coldly and stated clearly, we won't escalate this with the police any further, but we're cutting ties with you from now on. Cutting ties. Julia's voice was barely audible. I heard the fear in her voice. Julia began speaking in a trembling voice, clearly distressed. Wait, Emma, why are you really abandoning me? Aren't we family? Why would you do this? I had no intention of listening to her desperate plea. We couldn't allow her to disrupt our lives any longer. I was confident that this decision was necessary to protect our safety and peace. Reinforcing my resolve internally, I responded firmly, yes, we're cutting ties. We're moving, and we won't tell you where. This is the end of any connection between us. Julia froze, her shaking hands resting on the table as she listened. It seemed she was finally realizing the seriousness of our decision. Her mouth opened several times, as if to say something, but no words came out. Please, wait. May, let's talk about this. It's a misunderstanding. I only wanted to do what was best for George. She pleaded in a voice that lacked the strength she once had. It was as if she was only now grasping the gravity of her loss. At that moment, George stepped forward, speaking quietly yet resolutely. Mom, this is the end. I won't let you keep hurting May. Julia reached out to George, as if trying to cling to him, but he gently moved away, maintaining his firm stance. George, even just you. Please don't abandon me. Julia implored tearfully, her voice barely audible. I feel the same as May, Mom. Please don't contact us anymore. Hearing his word, Julia was silent and frozen, her gaze fixed on her trembling hands. This is the end. Thank you for everything until now, I said calmly. Julia then turned and left our home, her steps unsteady. I quietly closed the door behind her, watching as she walked away. We were ready to move forward. George and I were determined to rebuild our lives without Julia's presence. Afterward, we moved to a new place, and our life gradually found a peaceful rhythm. Julia was no longer a part of our world, and the anxiety and pressure that had loomed over us began to dissipate. The loneliness Julia must have felt after losing her husband must have been overwhelming. It drove her to interfere in our lives excessively and, ultimately, isolating herself. Her fear of losing her son had led her down this tragic path. Thank you, May. I don't know what I'd have done without you. You were there for me through everything with Mom. I couldn't have made it without your support. It goes both ways. I feel like I only made it through this because you were by my side, George. No one knows where Julia went after that. Once people realized the truth, that I had been falsely accused, then she became a subject of cold stares from the neighbors. Fearing both judgment and loneliness, she turned to relatives for help, but no one was there to support her. Eventually, Julia's voice fell silent, and the neighbors said she was no longer seen. As for us, a new happiness came into our lives. We were finally blessed with the child we had longed for. When the doctor told me, "Congratulations, you're pregnant," I was speechless with joy and surprise. My heart raced, and tears came naturally to my eyes. When I got home, George was waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" he asked, looking into my face, his expression tense. "We're having a baby." The moment he heard those words, George's expression changed. His face lit up in surprise and happiness. He looked at me with wide eyes before pulling me into an embrace. "Really? May, thank you. Thank you so much." We shared a moment of pure joy right then and there. This new life was the greatest blessing for us, especially after all the hardships we had overcome. Together, we would continue building a happy future for our family.
Kennedy, if you bought a new house, we're moving in with you. It's unthinkable for part of the family to leave the rest of us behind. Now that you're married to Cody, we're all in this together. Why do you have to stick so close to us? This is Cody's and my life. Don't you think it's time to let your son go? Why should we have to do that? Cody may be married, but he's still part of our family. And since you married Cody, you're now part of our family too. I appreciate you saying that, but I'm not a fan of being tied down. Regardless, I'm going to live with you too. It's useless to say no. If you won't accept it, I'll make you get a divorce. All right then. In that case, we'll get divorced. When I said that, my in-laws seemed overjoyed. They must be thrilled about being able to move into a new house. And no doubt they're happy to remove me from the family. I was fed up with my in-laws, so I'm feeling refreshed to get away from them. However, on moving day, I got an angry call from my mother-in-law Matilda. She must have finally realized she fell into the trap I set. What's going on here? This isn't what we agreed on. This is unacceptable. Do you have any idea how awful what you've done is? It's too late to say that now. Cody and I are already divorced, so I have nothing to do with you anymore. Just accept living in that house quietly. Bye. Then, as if he'd been listening in, my ex-husband Cody took over for Matilda. You think you can get away with this? I never knew you were this unreasonable. I'm baffled as to why I ever married someone like you. Right back at you. When I said that, Cody fell silent, apparently unable to find a retort. I hope they, thinking only of themselves, will suffer thoroughly. My name is Kennedy, 28 years old. I work at a real estate company I joined after graduating college. My job isn't to do sales myself, but to entertain clients brought in by our company's salespeople. So I don't do any outside work, and am always in the office. But this job involves talking with many people, so there are apparently a lot of chances to meet someone compared to other companies. Thanks to that, I started dating someone I met through work a few years ago, and we ended up getting married. When I first met Cody, he was a truly wonderful man. He forgave me no matter what I said and always put me first. When I introduced Cody to my friends, they were so envious. Cody really is a great guy. You won't find many like him, so you have to cherish him. I guess you met him because you're a good person too, Kennedy. I'm so happy to hear you praise him like that. I've never met such a good man either. That's why I intend to treasure him. We just got married, so there's still a lot I don't know though. But you dated him for a long time before getting married, right? So you must know him pretty well. Everyone around us is starting to get married too, but I think Cody is the best of all. There aren't many people who can think that much of their spouse. That may be true, but I can't relax just yet. I don't know what kind of people Cody's parents are, and there's the whole daughter-in-law issues too. They seemed like good people when we met though. If they raised a guy like Cody, his parents must be good people. But you never know what might happen in this world, so you can't be totally at ease. If anything happens, you can always talk to me. I'm on your side, Kennedy. I'm so happy to hear you say that. I'm always relying on you. Sorry about that. My friends praise Cody a lot. I like Cody too, but when my friends compliment him, I end up liking him even more. It makes me think I have to treasure him more, and reaffirms just how precious he is. Even after getting married, Cody stayed a good man, always putting me first. From what I hear, a lot of people change completely after marriage, so I'm really grateful for Cody's personality. But a few months after we got married, Cody started acting strange recently. He'd leave me at home and frequently go back to his parents' place. I didn't know what he was doing, so I decided to ask him. You've been going back to your parents a lot lately. What are you doing there? If something happened with your family, I'd like you to tell me about it. Is there some issue you can't even tell me about? It's nothing. I just go back because I want to. Or is there some reason I'm not allowed to visit my own family? I didn't think you were the kind of woman to be so controlling. That's not what I meant, but why are you talking like that? You've been acting weird lately. Did something happen? If you're having trouble at work, I'm here to listen. Just because you're some big shot at a real estate firm, you think you can boss me around? If you have that much free time, why don't you find us a house to live in? You're in real estate, so it should be easy, right? All right, I'll look for a house for the two of us then. Do you have any particular conditions you want? I'll take those into consideration if you do. We might have kids in the future, so I want as big a house as possible. We don't know how many we'll have, so find the biggest place you can. Since Cody told me to, I started looking for a house. I wasn't thrilled with how he said it, but I'm glad he's thinking about things like our future kids. Honestly, if we were a normal couple, it might be weird to be happy about just this. But I've been worried with Cody constantly going back to his parents' place, so even this made me happy. And when I was looking for a house for the two of us, I found a few good ones. So I decided to suggest them to Cody. Cody is the type to carefully consider everything, so I don't expect him to make a decision right away. But I'm hoping to at least get his opinion. I was thinking about that when Cody happened to get home from work. So I decided to talk to him about the house stuff. Hey, I found a few good houses. Can you take a look? I'm not saying you have to choose from these, I just want your opinion. This is the house we'll be living in from now on, so let's decide carefully. Oh right, I forgot to tell you something, Kennedy. Actually, my mom and Alexis are coming over today. So get things ready. If you don't tidy up the rooms more, Mom will get mad at you. I never heard anything about that. What's going on? If they're coming, tell me way in advance. There's only so much I can do if you spring this on me suddenly. I thought I told you, but I was busy with work and forgot. It's not something to get that mad about. What's with you? You just need to clean a bit, so don't get so angry. We just got married, so I don't want Matilda to hate me. I can't believe you don't understand how I feel. I was trying to talk about the house and everything, but now that plan is ruined. Why are you so mad? It's just two family members coming over. And we can talk about the house whenever, it's fine. You're in real estate, you must talk about houses all day. If anything, I figured you wouldn't want to talk about it. Talking about real estate for work and talking about the house we'll live in are completely different. I've been squeezing in time to look this whole time. Why are you saying such awful things? I was so happy when you said we should look for a house. Cody doesn't seem to understand my feelings at all, looking totally unfazed. It's not like I'd react this badly if Matilda and my sister-in-law Alexis were nice people. But Matilda and Alexis seem to hate me, always acting superior and pressuring me. I haven't told anyone, but it's really stressing me out. I haven't told Cody because I don't want to make him worry. So I don't think he's noticed at all. Still, I'm clearly showing how much I hate this. I'm so disappointed he won't sympathize with me at all. He was so kind before we got married. Why did it end up like this? Before we got married, he was desperate to win me over. But now that he has me, maybe he stopped caring. But now that we're married, I can't just easily get divorced. So I start getting ready for the two of them to come, even though I don't want to. But while I'm getting ready, the two of them show up. My, I thought he told you we were coming, but you're still cleaning up. You really are a slob through and through. I can't believe why Cody married you. I'm sorry, I only just heard you two were coming. If I knew in advance, I would have gotten ready. You think that excuse will fly? You should keep things tidy even if we weren't coming. Living in a messy house, there must be something wrong with you. It wasn't that messy. I'm almost done cleaning, so please wait a bit. Go on in and relax with Cody for now. Geez, making us go out of our way. There's definitely something wrong with you. If you're part of our family, you need to get your act together. I heard you work for a real estate firm, so I thought you'd be more capable than this. The two of them just keep bad-mouthing me. It seems like they dote on Cody so much that they don't like me, his wife. I heard before that the two of them told Cody he never had to get married. Normally you'd think they'd want him to get married, but apparently this family is different. They want to stay together as much as possible. Alexis apparently chose not to get married for that reason. But there's nothing I can do even if they say that to me after we're already married. If they're going to complain, I wish they'd complain to Cody who chose to get married. But even when they say stuff to me, Cody doesn't take my side at all. He doesn't seem to care even when I try talking to him directly about it. Why did those two suddenly decide to visit? Honestly, I don't like them, so I want them to leave soon. At this rate, it's going to really stress me out. Apparently they're renovating their house, so they'll be staying with us for a while. We just got married, so you're not used to it yet, but you'll get used to it with this visit. If you don't get along with them soon, it'll just stay awkward. I never heard about this. This makes no sense. Why didn't you tell me about something so important way sooner? How long are they planning to stay? I don't know the details, but just assume we'll be living together. We got married and became a family, so deal with at least that much. We're trying to buy a new house anyway, so it works out. Wait a second, you're planning to live together even in the new house? Is that why you said to find a place that fits a lot of people? We're family, so don't ignore me like this. You don't have to get so mad. We're family. Living with 2 people or 4 people, it's no different. Anyway, just find a house for all of us to live in. What Cody is saying makes absolutely no sense. We finally got married, so why do we have to live with 4 people? I was worried, so I asked before we got married, but he said there was no chance of a 2-family home. But now that he's saying this after we're married, I can't accept it. But it seems like the other 3 are moving forward with this without me. I accidentally overheard them talking about living together when I wasn't around. I wonder what kind of place the new house will be. If possible, I'd like somewhere with a big yard. She's a real estate agent, so she'll find a good place. We can just relax and wait. That's why you married a real estate agent after all. She better find a good house for us or we'll be in trouble. She can't do anything besides her job, so at least she can look for a house. For now, let's keep talking about this without her finding out. We just need to get our hands on a good house. I had no idea they were scheming behind my back like this. I can't believe the reason Cody married me was for a house. I'm sure Cody had other reasons too, but Matilda and Alexis really seemed to be in it for the house. So that's why he was nice to me before we got married, but suddenly got cold and started going back to his parents' place after the wedding. Now that I've heard that, I can't put up with this anymore. I've decided to divorce Cody. I won't forgive them for harassing me so much while planning to benefit themselves. They tried to use me, so I'll make absolutely sure they regret it. While keeping those feelings to myself and pretending I hadn't heard anything, I proceeded with the meeting about the house with Cody. About the new house, is it okay if I decide everything? I'll make sure it's a house the four of us can comfortably live in, so don't worry. You're a real estate agent after all, so find us a good place. Alexis said she wants somewhere with a big yard, so consider that too. And Mom said she wants to get a pet, so I'm counting on you for that as well. I see, so a house with a big yard where we can have pets. The pets shouldn't be an issue since it's our own place. But if we want a big yard, it might end up being a bit in the countryside. That's not a problem at all, so don't worry about it. The place Mom and Alexis live now is pretty rural too. Dad works away from home and doesn't come back, so you don't have to think about that. I hadn't heard about Taylor, so he works away from home? But is it really okay to decide on the house without getting their opinion? If we're going to live together, shouldn't we discuss it with them? Those two are leaving it to you since you're a real estate agent. So you can go ahead without worrying about them. If anything happens, I'll take responsibility, so don't worry. It's just until the renovations on their house are done anyway. We don't have to think too hard about it. Cody says that, but I know better since I overheard them. Rather than trusting me, they're just trying to use me. Honestly, I say the four of us will live together to Cody, but I have no intention of that. I'll wait for the right moment, then send my in-laws crashing down. I'm sure once we buy the new house, they'll say we're all living together forever. So that's what I'm aiming for as I advance my plan. I don't know how it will turn out in the end, but I'll keep thinking things over as I proceed with the plan. But even while I'm thinking about that, Matilda and Alexis keep harassing me. As for Alexis, apparently she quit her job right when she came to stay with us. And she has the nerve to demand money from me. Hey, I heard real estate agents make good money. Is that true? If it is, I'll hold on to it for you. I used to work at a bank, so you can feel safe in trusting it to me. You don't have to go to the trouble. I have the bank managing it properly, so don't worry. Thank you for your concern though. You really don't get it, do you? I'm telling you to hand over the money now. We let you marry Cody, so the least you can do is give us some money. Why should I have to give you money? And if you need money, I think you should work for it. I don't get why you're demanding it from me at all. We're family now, so of course we should combine our bank accounts. As a first step, you can let me hold on to your money. Of course I'll give it back to you after increasing it, so don't worry about that. Increase it? You mean you're planning to go gambling again? I heard from Cody that you do that a lot. Please don't use my hard-earned money for that. Geez, you're really hopeless. Even after I explained this much, you won't hand over the money. You're way too stingy. If you're going to be like that, I'll make Cody divorce you. If you like Cody that much, why don't you get money from him? If you can really increase it, I'm sure Cody would be thrilled. And I think you should ask Cody first before me anyway. What are you saying? Cody's salary is low, so I feel bad for him. You must have a screw loose if you don't get that. I won't forgive you if you keep this up. So you don't feel bad for me? This makes absolutely no sense. Anyway, I have no intention of giving you money. When I said that, Alexis stormed off somewhere, probably realizing she definitely wasn't getting the money. I guess even Alexis couldn't do anything after I firmly refused like that. But trying to live with us and even demand money from me, it's totally absurd. The more they stress me out like this, the more I want to get back at them majorly. That said, I didn't think Alexis would give up that easily, so I decided to watch the situation for a while. The next morning, while thinking about that, I checked my bag. The money I put in there to pay utility bills was gone. The timing made me suspect Alexis, so I watched her for a bit. And sure enough, I caught her stealing my money. It seems she's been taking money not just for utilities, but from my wallet too. And it's not just Alexis harassing me, but Matilda too. Is the new house still not decided? If you don't hurry, the renovations on our place will be done. I want to live in the new house, so decide quickly. I'm looking as hard as I can, but it's just not getting decided. For 4 adults to have plenty of space, it has to be a pretty big house. There are some if we go a bit rural, but... Oh, just pick one of those then, let's decide. If you don't find a house soon, it'll be cramped here. How long are you going to make us suffer? You don't have to say it like that. I'm scrambling to deal with you all suddenly deciding to live with us. Just hurry up and decide on a house. Make it so we can move in 2 weeks. Otherwise, I'll have Cody divorce you. Oh, okay. Normally, I'd hate only being told unpleasant things, but for me, fully intending to divorce Cody, those words made me happy. I decided to take what Matilda said at face value and act on it. So no matter what they say to me, there's no room for argument. After all, it's what Matilda herself told me to do. And just as they requested, I found a suitable house and brought it up with Cody. He said to put it in his name so he doesn't look bad to Matilda and Alexis. Putting it in your name means you're paying the down payment too, right? We can split the mortgage payments, but the down payment is set low anyway, so it's fine. More importantly, I want it in my name in case something happens. I want to be able to say it's my house no matter what. If you're okay with that. And you don't need to check anything else about the house? You won't complain even if I go ahead with the contract like this? You took Mom and Alexis' opinions into account, right? Then I won't nitpick. You can double-check with them if you want, but I don't think they'll say anything. I'll check with them so I don't get complained at if something happens. I'm afraid they'll gripe and push responsibility onto me. I'll confirm with them tomorrow and go ahead with the contract if it seems all right. As long as it's in my name, I don't care about the details. You 3 women can do whatever you want with the rest. Since he said that, I decided to get confirmation from those 2 so they wouldn't have any complaints. It seems like they trust me with finding a property since I'm a real estate agent. So I don't think they'll have any objections, but I wanted to check just in case. I have to, or else I feel like they'll gripe at me in all sorts of ways after we move. Thinking that, I immediately went to confirm with the 2 of them. I found the house we'll be living in next, but can you check it? It's a property with a big yard and ability to have pets that you 2 mentioned. That said, I assume you 2 will move out right away, but if it has a big yard, anywhere is fine, just hurry it up. I heard you were a capable real estate agent, But you're way too slow. If you're thinking of us, put a move on it. Anywhere is fine with me too, as long as it's bigger than here. But having pets has always been my dream, so keep that in mind. Just get a move on, or staying here will get depressing. I'm going as fast as I can here. It has the conditions of a big yard and allowing pets, so are we good? Then I'll go ahead with the contract on this house. We don't need you to check that stuff. Just hurry up and sign the contract. How long are you going to make us live here? You really don't think of your family at all. I'm sick of it. Having firmly gotten statements from both of them, they have no right to complain no matter what kind of house it is. And it's huge that Cody is paying the down payment even though we're splitting the cost of the house. I wanted to reduce the amount I'm responsible for even a little. He's not usually this generous with money, so I think Matilda is assisting him. When I told Cody the contract was complete, Matilda and Alexis called for me. You finally decided on a house. You really are incapable at your job. Well, we'll be living together from now on, so I'm counting on you. Even if you say we're living together, it's just until the renovations are done, right? Oh, did I not tell you? We are renovating, but we already sold our old house. So we intend to live with you permanently. I never heard anything about that. Why didn't you tell me something so important? If it's true, I definitely think you should have said so from the start. What's the difference between living together a little while or forever? Just think of it as the time frame getting a bit longer. Are you trying to say you hate living with us that much? I really think Mom is totally right. Do you dislike living with my family that much? I can't believe you would say something like that. I just feel like my opinion isn't being considered at all. No matter how you look at it, it's wrong, so I don't want to live together. You could think about my feelings a little more. If you're that against living with us, we'll have Cody divorce you. I bet you don't want that, right? So live with us. And keep doing the housework for us too. If I have to go that far, then please divorce me. I loved Cody, but he's been strange lately. Please, all of you, go live in the new house or whatever. Oh, is that so? Works for us. Sorry you went to the trouble of finding a house though. The three of us, without you in the way, will live happily as a family. Everything contract related is finished, so rest assured. All that's left is paying for the house and alimony from the divorce. What do you mean alimony? I said I'd pay the down payment, but I never heard anything about alimony. There are a few things I want to claim, but first, you're cheating. Did you really think I hadn't noticed? Actually, when Cody suspiciously started going back to his parents more after we got married, I hired a private investigator. And it came out that while saying he was going to his parents, he was really going on dates with his coworker at work. I only found this out very recently, so I was planning to bring it up at this opportunity. Cody didn't seem to realize I had hired an investigator. And if I brought it up before deciding on divorce, I figured he'd try to talk his way out of it. So I properly asked the investigator to prepare evidence like photos. Either Cody had no idea I was doing this, or he's acting extremely surprised. Matilda and Alexis didn't seem to know either, unable to hide their shock. And when I lay out the photographic evidence, the three of them stare at it intently. I can't believe this was going on. I thought it was suspicious, so I had my investigator thoroughly investigated you. I thought you were going back to your parents way too much. Any man will have an affair or two. If you can't even forgive that, you're a really small-minded woman. Alexis will have to pay alimony too. Why should I have to pay alimony? I haven't cheated, so I have no obligation to pay. Alexis, you were stealing my money, right? The money for utility bills and from my wallet. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Don't spout nonsense with no proof. If it's proof you want, I have video I secretly took. And no way. Alexis, you borrowed money from me too, and you were doing stuff like that? Apparently, even though she told me she couldn't borrow from Cody, she must have gotten desperate. It seems she borrowed from him too. Not knowing that, Matilda looks flabbergasted. Anyway, please just pay the alimony and for the house. It's in Cody's name, so you all have the obligation to pay. This can't be. After that, the three of them moved into the new house at the address I sent them. The place we were living until now, I canceled the lease right at the renewal timing. So I'm at my parents' place. I thought I might be a bit lonely after the divorce, but with my parents and Kat here, I don't feel that lonely. If anything, I feel refreshed being away from my in-laws. While I was relaxing like that, I got an intense call from Matilda. Judging from the number of missed calls, something must have happened. I'm sure she realized the plot I schemed. I don't want them coming to the house, so I decided to answer. Hey, what is going on here? You tricked us, didn't you? Do you think you can get away with this? You sound really angry, but what happened? I just found a house that met your requests. And I got confirmation from you all before signing the contract. The house came with a ranch, and we're obligated to raise animals. I never heard anything about that. What are you going to do about this? It has a ranch as the big yard, and pets were already included. Alexis isn't working, so she can raise them. I just did exactly what you all told me to. There's no way we can raise cows. What kind of nonsense are you spouting? Anyway, we can't live somewhere like this. It's too late, the contract is already in Cody's name. Live there until you find a new place. I won't forgive you for this, prepare yourself. When I got your permission, you all signed the contract, remember? So no matter what, this will work out in my favor. In no way. When did you do that? Did you know we were trying to use you? I overheard that conversation too. Too bad, but you have no choice but to live there. This can't be. Why do we have to live on a ranch? If she has evidence of everything, we can't do anything. Now that I have proof, no one can argue back anymore. Actually, when I got their permission, I had them sign a written agreement just in case. So none of them can dispute it at all. The three of them were so eager to move that they signed without suspecting a thing. In the end, according to my coworker handling Cody and the others, they sold their old house too. So they're living in the rural house with the ranch that I picked out. It took time to find a property that came with a ranch that needed managing, but I'm glad I worked hard for it. I was able to properly get alimony from Cody, and now I'm living comfortably at my parents' place. I don't know what will happen from here on, but I'm going to believe in myself and keep living my life. I've gotten calls from Cody and Matilda asking me to help them, but I don't think they're worth helping. So I'm blocking their calls and just getting updates from my coworker. I told my coworker to be strict with Cody and the others. So I think they'll be living in that house with the ranch for a while. Take me to the cafe where Dad and Mom used to go before you two got married. My daughter Emily asked us, so we headed to the nostalgic cafe with her. Dad and Mom were close even before I was born, right? How would I remember? How about you, Evan? Don't remember something from so long ago. After a while, the waiter brought over 2 large puddings. 15 years ago, when Evan and I were dating, we often had this pudding. By the way, it's been exactly 15 years since we got married. As I took a bite, I realized something and checked the date on my phone. Today is Dad, Mom, happy 15th anniversary. I was overwhelmed by the unexpected surprise from my daughter. Dad, Mom, please stay happy together forever. I was so glad that Emily had grown up to be such a kind daughter. Yeah, it's delicious. The pudding that you treated us to is really delicious, Emily. When I said this to her with a big smile, she smiled back at me. Emily is growing up so quickly without us even noticing, I said, glancing casually at my husband, Evan. In that moment, I decided that today would be the last day we would be a family. My name is Marcia, and I'm 40 years old. I work part-time at a local supermarket and live with my husband Evan and our daughter Emily. Both Evan and I love children, so we naturally dreamed of having a family after getting married. However, years passed, and I still couldn't have children. This is something that just happens, so there's nothing we can do, Evan said to comfort me, but as we got older, I started to feel more and more anxious. Even though we went to the hospital for tests, neither of us had any problems. Knowing there was a possibility, we researched everything we could about trying to conceive whenever we had time. Evan was supportive and understanding, but my PIL were harsh with me. Marcia, don't you have children yet? We won't live forever, and we'd love to see our cute grandchild soon. Every time my mother-in-law Caddy visited our apartment, she would say that. At first, her tone was gentle, but as time passed with no results, her words became harsher. Evan's classmate just had their third child. The eldest is already in middle school. And Evan doesn't have any children yet? What's going on? Indirectly criticizing me for not being able to conceive, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable around her. Sean, my father-in-law, shared Caddy's opinion. We had Evan about a year after we got married. How long have you been married to him? It's been 9 years. And still no children? Every time I saw them, all I could do was bow my head and apologize. In the past, a wife who couldn't have children would be divorced and sent away immediately. Nowadays, it's a much more forgiving time. That's right. Men these days spoil their wives, and that's why the number of children isn't increasing. Mom, Dad, enough already. Evan stepped in between me and his parents, defending me. Normally gentle, he always stood up for me, especially when it came to the topic of children. Marcia is trying so hard to have a child. She's even careful about her diet. Don't push her any further. Caddy sneered at this. If she's trying that hard and still can't conceive, then maybe she has some problem. What do you mean by that? How can you say it's her fault? The hospital results showed no issues with her body. Caddy looked at him with a surprised expression. But isn't it true? She looked him in the eyes. If children are a gift from God, it wouldn't be strange for her to have 1 or 2 by now. Since she can't, it must be her fault. Yes, Caddy is right. Marcia must be doing something wrong. My parents-in-law nodded in agreement. What era are you living in? Don't stress her with these unscientific reasons. Mom, Dad, stop interfering with our lives. Evan forcefully escorted his parents out of the house. Don't let what Mom and Dad said bother you, Marcia. Evan comforted me with kind words, and I held back my urge to run away and face the infertility treatments. Evan did his own research on ways to conceive. Every time he found new information. How about this? Maybe we should try this? He would suggest. I tried everything I could. Maybe it was because of these efforts that, after 10 years of marriage, I finally became pregnant with our first child. Thank you, Evan. Without your support, I might have given up on having a child by now. I might have run away from this harsh reality. What are you talking about? You're the one who has been working so hard, Marcia. I just did what I could. Right now, it's not about me. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. Just give birth to a healthy baby. Even when I felt overwhelmed with anxiety during my first pregnancy, Just feeling his presence near me gave me courage. Then, as spring arrived, I safely gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Evan and I named our daughter Emily. Holding our newborn child in my arms, I found every feature, from her still-forming eyes, nose, and mouth, utterly lovable. This child was born to us, and now she was sleeping peacefully in my arms. Determined to ensure she would have a happy life, I vowed to overcome any hardship for her sake. As I felt her tiny heartbeat and gentle breaths, I swore to protect Emily with all my might. Looking at her sleeping face, she looks just like you, Marcia. You can't tell that yet. Don't you think her ear shape resembles yours? Really? Her nose looks like yours. She'll definitely grow up to be beautiful. Just then, there was a knock on the hospital room door, and my parents-in-law entered, their faces devoid of smiles. My heart, full of happiness, suddenly darkened as if clouds had gathered. Congratulations, Marcia. You finally had a child. It was as if they were implying I had been refusing to have a child all this time. Still, I decided to welcome them with a big smile. Seeing their grandchild's face might soften the expressions of my parents-in-law. Somewhere in my heart, I hoped for this. However, the moment Caddy looked at Emily's face, she exclaimed, "After waiting for 10 years, and this is the result? I'm utterly speechless." She didn't even attempt to touch Emily. "If you were going to have a child, it should have been a boy. This is absolutely unacceptable." She dramatically placed her hand on her forehead and sighed. "Well, it's a girl this time, but next time, make sure to have a boy. We're counting on you." You're acting like Emily doesn't even exist. Did you come here just to say that? That's not it. We're simply hoping for a male heir for the family. Whether it's a boy or a girl, as long as the child is healthy, that's all that matters. Evan, the furious, was stopped by me tugging on his sleeve. "I'm sorry for not meeting your expectations, Sean, Caddy. Marcia, make sure to reflect on this and have a proper boy next time. Though, given your age, we're not expecting much." With those words, my parents-in-law left the hospital room. They have no idea what they're talking about. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Marcia. The way my parents-in-law treated me and Emily was deeply hurtful. However, Evan's empathy and support were my only solace. Despite this, my parents-in-law continued to disregard me and Emily at every opportunity. Caddy seemed to think that not having a son was a disgrace to the family. When it came time to introduce newborn Emily to the relatives, one of them congratulated me. Caddy quickly interrupted. "Unfortunately, it's not a boy. By the way, are we good on food? We should prepare more beer since more guests will arrive." She diverted the topic away from Emily and me. "Please, stay out of sight in front of the relatives. The room next door is empty, so go play with Emily there." Caddy treated us like nuisances, physically distancing us from the family. 3 years passed, and Evan began to change. He used to be supportive, but now he was coming home late and often absent even on his days off, citing work as the reason. Initially, I accepted it as part of his busy job, but his behavior towards Emily also grew cold. One evening, as the front door opened, "Dad's home! Dad's home!" Emily dropped her picture book and ran to hug Evan's legs. Previously, "Hey, Emily. I'm home. Were you a good girl?" Evan would have smiled and lifted her up. But recently, without a hint of a smile, he said, "I'm tired. Marcia, take care of Emily." He forcibly removed Emily, who clung to his legs. Unfazed. "Dad, hug me." Emily persisted. "Be quiet. You're giving me a headache. If you don't behave, I'll throw you out." Emily, shocked by her beloved dad's harsh words, burst into tears. There, it's okay. Don't be scared." After she calmed down, I looked at Evan. "Whatever's happening at work, you shouldn't take it out on Emily. Shut up! What do you know? Don't speak to me like that until you've given me a son. Evan had changed so much in the past 3 years that I could hardly recognize him. Why are you saying things like that? You sound just like Caddy. I've come to realize that my mom was right about everything once I had a child of my own. With a sigh, Evan loosened his tie. I don't need dinner. I'm going out. He left the house without even changing clothes. Dad, where did he go? Is it because I was a bad girl? No, sweetie. Dad loves you more than anything in the world. Was it the stress from work? I kept telling myself it was just a phase, but his attitude never softened. Instead, Evan started taking out his frustrations on me as well, despite my busy days filled with housework, childcare, and part-time work. Exhausted from parenting, I began to consider divorce due to the changes in Evan. Emily, do you love Dad? I love Dad. But I love you too, Mom. Mom, don't you love Dad? Looking into Emily's clear, innocent eyes, I couldn't bring myself to divorce him. I hoped he would return to his former self and that someday we could reconcile with my parents-in-law. But Evan's behavior only worsened, and our relationship with my PIL remained strained. Evan's absence became routine, and even on Emily's 5th birthday, he didn't contact us. Dad's at work again? Sitting in front of her birthday cake, her eyes were filled with sadness. Yes, sweetie. He loves you so much that he's working hard to make you happy. He is amazing. Here, this is a present from Dad. I handed her a teddy bear that I had bought myself. It's so cute. I'm glad Dad is my dad. By this time, Evan had stopped depositing most of his salary into our bank account. Worse, the balance was gradually decreasing without my knowledge. Could he really be? My distrust of Evan grew day by day. Fearing that our life might be disrupted, I made several promises with Emily. Turn off the lights when they're not in use. Go to bed by 9 p.m. If she wanted to read a book, we would borrow it from the library together. By cutting down on expenses and increasing my part-time work without neglecting childcare, I managed to stretch our budget as far as possible. Mom, are you okay? You look tired. I didn't think I was overexerting myself, but I must have been frowning without realizing it. I forced a smile. I'm fine, Emily. Don't worry. When I patted her head, she gave an awkward smile, even more so than mine, and said, I'm glad. Seeing her like that, I felt deeply inadequate as a mother for causing her such worry. Around this time, Caddy started helping with Emily's pickup and drop-off when I couldn't manage due to my part-time job. I'm sorry, Caddy. Don't worry about it. Emily is our precious granddaughter, after all. What had caused this change of heart? Caddy, who had once openly avoided me, and Emily, now seemed different. Despite my unease, I had no choice but to accept her help. One Sunday morning, after cleaning up breakfast, I suggested, Mom doesn't have work today, so how about we go out somewhere? I wanted to bring back Emily's natural smile. Emily ran up to me, her eyes sparkling. Mom, Dad is off work today too, right? Can we go out to eat, the 3 of us? I'm fine with that, but... I glanced at Evan, who was sitting on the living room sofa, reading the newspaper. Dad, please? Can we go out to eat, just the 3 of us? I'm tired. If you two want to go out, just go without me. Please? Just this once, Dad. I want to go out with both you and Mom. Reluctantly, Evan, unable to refuse his daughter's earnest plea, agreed. All right then, just for today. He sighed lightly, folding his newspaper. Emily seemed to have a particular place in mind. I heard from Lily. That cafe where you and Mom used to go a lot. Take us there. Lily is a former colleague from the company I used to work for, who still visits us occasionally after I left my job to get married. Such unnecessary meddling. Evan clicked his tongue softly while gripping the steering wheel. Dad and Mom, you two were really close before I was born, right? How would you know? Do you even remember? How could I remember something from so long ago? Evan ended the conversation abruptly, but I found myself smiling at the old memories. Look, Mom's smiling. Emily noticed, and I shyly covered my face with both hands. That's creepy. Why are you blushing? Evan's scolding wiped away the nostalgic feelings in an instant. When we arrived at the cafe, there was a reserved sign on a windowside table. Emily tugged my hand. This way. And she rushed over. Emily, that table is reserved. When I called Lily earlier, she made a reservation for us. I couldn't help but laugh at Emily's excitement. Evan, however, seemed uninterested in his daughter's effort, his eyes glued to his mobile phone. After we sat down, a waiter brought 2 large puddings to our table. 15 years ago, when Evan and I were dating, we used to visit this cafe and enjoy these puddings. Seeing the unchanged $2 puddings, both in shape and size, brought a smile to my face. Doesn't this pudding remind you of our younger days? Evan didn't even glance at the pudding, engrossed in his phone. Speaking of which, it's been exactly 15 years since we got married. As soon as I said it, something struck me. I quickly checked the date on my phone. Could it be that today is? Dad, Mom. Happy 15th wedding anniversary. I felt a warm glow in my chest from the unexpected surprise from my daughter. Thank you, Emily. But even though there were 3 of us at the table, the third pudding never seemed to arrive no matter how long we waited. It's taking a while. Emily, go ahead and eat this pudding. Emily shook her head vigorously. This is for you, Mom. Today is your wedding anniversary, so I'm not eating. I paid for it myself. I tilted my head in confusion at her words. Emily, where did you get the money? I had never given her an allowance. Grandma gave it to me. She said it was a reward for cleaning the bathroom and the yard. After I got home from preschool, I cleaned her house every day and saved up. Isn't that impressive? Emily proudly puffed out her chest, but I felt a sense of unease. Did you want to do that yourself? Or did she tell you to do it? I wanted to give you 2 a present for their anniversary. Caddy said if I wanted that, I should clean the house. I really wanted to eat the pudding too, but the store clerk said I only had enough money for 2. Next time, I'll save enough to buy 3. Seeing Emily's eyes sparkle with determination, I felt more sadness than joy. Dad, Mom, please stay happy together forever. Emily's earnest wish made it impossible for me to hold back my tears. Even though she was so young, she had noticed the strain in my relationship with Evan. No matter how much he avoided her and me, to Emily, he was the only dad in the world. For her, it was only natural to want her parents to get along. Realizing how much strain I had put on Emily made me feel deeply ashamed. Emily, I really appreciate your feelings. But you should eat this pudding. No. It's not mine. It's your pudding. Why won't you eat it? Emily's face started to crumple as if she was about to cry, and I hurriedly tried to soothe her. I'm sorry. This is Mom's pudding. I took a spoonful and put it in my mouth. It's delicious. The pudding that Emily treated me to is so delicious. Seeing my beaming smile, Emily finally looked satisfied and smiled back. I ate half of the pudding and then slid the plate over to Emily. It was so delicious. Mom's full now, so you can have the rest. Oh, all right. Emily began eating the remaining pudding. She must have really wanted to eat it herself. But she had restrained herself for our wedding anniversary. I felt so grateful that she had grown into such a kind-hearted girl. Emily is growing up in ways we don't even realize, I said absent-mindedly, glancing at Evan. Evan, however, was still engrossed in his mobile phone, having pushed the pudding to the edge of the table without touching it. Why don't you eat a little? She went out of her way to treat us, I suggested. If you want it, you eat it. I'm not in the mood right now, he replied curtly. His indifferent response made me doubt my ears. "Didn't you hear what Emily said?" "Yeah, I heard her. Something about our wedding anniversary. Sorry, I was thinking about other things," he said, handing the pudding to Emily. "Did you really think adults would be thrilled with something as sweet as pudding? Here, Emily. You should eat it. You don't have to say it like that. You should appreciate her kindness," I snapped. "Well, I'd be much happier sleeping at home than being treated to this pudding," he retorted. I couldn't contain my anger at his utter lack of appreciation for Emily. "Is that how you talk to your daughter?" Evan didn't seem to hear my question, his eyes still glued to his phone. "Dad, do you hate me?" Emily asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "Sorry, Dad's busy right now. Don't bother me," Evan replied dismissively. "Do you want to go home?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah, let's go home," he said, standing up without a care in the world. How could he not notice his daughter's feelings? Emily doesn't need a dad like that. My feelings for Evan chilled dramatically. Back home, Emily remained downcast. Something Evan was too absorbed in his phone to notice. I opened the drawer in my room and slipped the savings I'd been accumulating for emergencies into my handbag, then rushed out of the house and headed to a detective agency in the next town. A month later, I was called by the detective and informed of a certain fact. "He is definitely having an affair." Spread across the desk were dozens of photos showing Evan enjoying meals with a young woman and entering and leaving hotels. So, it was that after all. Some part of me had always been prepared for this. Seeing those photos didn't shake me. What surprised me most was that his infidelity involved multiple women. It seems he didn't have a specific partner. He used dating apps and social media to meet women indiscriminately, with most encounters ending after just one meeting. Still, the fact remained that Evan had betrayed Emily and me. I immediately went to pick Emily up from kindergarten and headed straight to the train station instead of going home. I called my dad, Neil, and my mom, Rosie, explaining the situation and asking if we could stay with them for a while. "Aren't we going home?" "Neil and Rosie are waiting for us. They're excited to see you, Emily." "What about Dad?" I couldn't bring myself to answer her question. Upon arriving at my parents' house, I mailed the completed divorce papers to Evan. "Hey, what do you mean by divorce?" 3 days later, Evan called after receiving the divorce papers. "It means exactly what it says." "Don't be ridiculous. Bring Emily and come back right now." "Neither Emily nor I have any intention of returning to your house ever again." Evan, not considering his own actions, started to blame Emily and me. "Just cancel the divorce. If you come back now, I'll forgive this whole thing. Hang up and come home immediately. Understand?" "Are you finished?" "What? I already know about your multiple meetings with other women. The evidence is overwhelming." His voice became panicked on the other end of the line. "It's not just the infidelity. What I find unforgivable is your attitude towards Emily." "What did I ever do to her?" "For years now, you haven't contributed your salary to the household. Moreover, you've been withdrawing large sums from our joint bank account every month. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That account was meant for her future, as we agreed. How could you touch that money?" "I just borrowed a bit. I was going to put it back soon." He quickly made excuses, but the amounts were too large and the period too long to be a mere loan. "You were buying expensive brand name gifts for the women you liked, weren't you? I know everything. I have nothing more to say to you." Just then, Emily came over and leaned toward the phone. "I hate you, Dad. Goodbye." "Emily? Tomorrow, we can go to the amusement park together." Evan continued to say something, but I hung up and immediately blocked his number. Evan and my parents-in-law refused to accept the divorce, so we had to go to court. His reason for rejecting the divorce wasn't because he still had feelings for Emily or me, but because he cared about appearances. However, the evidence of Evan's infidelity gathered by the detective was decisive, and the court fully recognized my claims. Ironically, his affair started when he was researching fertility treatments. He came across an ad for a dating app on social media. Out of curiosity, he checked it out and found a woman he liked. What began as light messaging to relieve stress escalated until he couldn't stop himself, eventually meeting the women in person. "I never realized how much fun meeting different women could be," he confessed bitterly when he realized he had lost. "I was awarded full custody of Emily, and she is now living peacefully at my parents' house under their loving care." Caddy's habit of making a 5-year-old do household chores had already become a neighborhood rumor. It was reported that she forced her to redo the cleaning, even if a single leaf was left in the yard, making Emily cry. Learning that Caddy had used Emily as a servant, under the pretense of being kind, brought me to tears. The divorce further tarnished the reputation of my parents-in-law, who were already struggling under the weight of their actions. Despite the cold looks they received at work, they had to continue to pay the alimony and child support. On the other hand, my parents Neil and Rosie adore Emily. "Emily will be a first grader soon. How about we go look for a school bag this Saturday? Or would you prefer the aquarium? Let's make pot au feu tonight with the vegetables Neil harvested. Emily loves it, right? Eat as much as you want." Initially, Emily would sometimes cry, missing her dad, but now my parents do everything they can to bring out her genuine smile. As a result, her no longer forces herself to smile just to cheer me up. She now shows her pure, innocent smile from the bottom of her heart. Watching her radiant smile, I am determined to protect her pure and kind heart. I have no intention of taking Joe in. Just put him in some facility or something. Emma, the ex-wife of my recently deceased husband, screamed this to the surrounding relatives, as I still couldn't grasp the reality of losing my husband to a heart attack. We had been married for just a month. The marriage that ended too soon left me with Joe, my husband's child from a previous relationship. Despite his biological mother's rare appearance, Joe never once looked up, remaining hunched over in his seat at the funeral home. Everyone seemed to show sympathy for Joe from a distance, but their attitudes shifted upon witnessing Emma's behavior. It's inevitable, being the child of such a mother, that the child's blood is no good either. Eventually, Mike's relatives started making selfish remarks. "Who's going to take Joe in? Your place, maybe? We definitely can't." I slowly stood up and rushed to Joe's side, looking into his face. "Are you okay? Want to go to another room?" "Hey, you don't need to care for me. I can just go to a facility or something." Feeling a tightness in my chest, before I could even think, I was hugging Joe. I could feel the cold stares of those around us. Then someone audibly remarked, which stirred my emotions. "Raising a dead husband's child is insane." Stepping away from Joe, I clenched his hand and shouted at the relatives watching from a distance. "No matter what anyone says, I will raise this child properly." My emphatic declaration was met with skepticism by everyone at the funeral home. Then, a petite man sitting in the funeral home chairs coughed softly before walking up to me and looked into my eyes. It was Tom, my dad, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you saying you'll raise that child all by yourself?" "Yes. I will make Mike's child something to be proud of." "Don't be ridiculous." Dad suddenly pulled Joe's arm towards him and stormed out of the funeral home. "My name is Nancy. I lived with a man I met in college, thinking we would marry someday. On an ordinary day, not a special anniversary, he gave me something somewhat like a proposal. It wasn't particularly romantic, but I fondly remember the small, cute flower he gave me at that time. It was a small, star-shaped white flower that grew in a corner of a nearby parking lot. It was a star lily. I didn't rush into marriage immediately after the proposal, but after some time, I decided to go to the gynecologist alone. It was because when I told a friend I might marry my boyfriend, she had asked, "Aren't you going to get checked?" While I was sitting in the gynecologist's clean waiting room, I overheard a conversation. It was between a daughter in her 20s and her mother, discussing the daughter's upcoming marriage next month. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the mother spoke loudly, mentioning her daughter was there for a bridal check. Receiving my boyfriend's proposal, I came here with the same thought, feeling a bit scared and shaky. What if the examination today reveals some disease? How should I explain it to him? I wanted to ask the chatting mother and daughter sitting next to me. "Hey, if you found a disease, would you still marry your loved one?" The warm sunlight through the window brightened the waiting room. As the parent and child who finished their consultation earlier left with smiles, it was my turn for the examination. When I left the hospital after the examination, the previously sunny sky had turned overcast, looking like it might rain at any moment. Weeks later, the examination results revealed that my body has difficulty conceiving children. Eventually, I broke up with that boyfriend. I didn't explain the reason to him. Or should I say, I didn't want to. I didn't want his sympathy, nor had I ever really wanted children. Avoiding the gaze of children in passing families, I had to tell myself I didn't like kids, or else I felt like I would sink into despair. Years later, I met Mike, a man from a business deal, and I fell for him. Despite deciding never to fall in love again, I found myself drawn to Mike's lonely expression. I asked Mike out. Sitting by the window of a cafe near my workplace, we might have been trying to figure each other out. Then, as if making up his mind, Mike straightened up and began to speak. "I'm actually divorced. I have a son and we live together." "I see. That's okay with me. And besides, I have difficulty conceiving." "What?" "So I want to raise your child as my own." At this point, I had never met Mike's son. But I was determined to cherish him if he was my own. Mike smiled sadly for a moment before whispering in a soft, thin voice, "Thank you." And that's how our relationship began. Emma, Mike's ex-wife, apparently abandoned her household and childcare duties and left the home. It's unclear if that was the direct cause, but Joe, their son, must have felt lonely. Despite being only 10 years old, he would hang out with older friends near the station late into the night. Mike's job kept him busy, often returning home late, leaving little time to connect with Joe. Soon after we started dating, I asked for an opportunity to meet Joe, and sincerely told him that I was seriously considering marriage with Mike. I then decided to visit their home daily, preparing meals and spending time with Joe. I cooked kid-friendly dishes like pizza, chicken nuggets, and pasta, making sure he ate plenty. Initially hesitant, Joe began to open up and show his genuine, childlike side. "Joe, do you like tonight's dinner?" "Yeah, it's delicious." I wanted to stop Joe from wandering out at night, so I would finish my work early and always come by in the evening to cook. That alone made Mike deeply grateful, and a year into our relationship, we decided to get married. Legally becoming Joe's parent filled me with happiness. We didn't report our marriage to my parents. Mike's parents had already passed away. It wasn't that I had a bad relationship with my parents or any special circumstances, I just hadn't seen them for many years. I was raised by my father after losing my mother at a young age. "I'd like to meet Grandpa someday," Joe said, so smiling, and to that, with little hesitation, I nodded. After getting married, I tried harder than ever to cook for Joe and do as much motherly things as possible. But I had no motherly role model. My father was always busy with work, and I don't have many memories of being doted on. Young women, who seemed to be employees at my father's glass factory, would come to keep me company and cook for me in turns. The sound of glass clinking, echoing from the nearby factory until night, still lingers in my ears. When I went to see my father at the factory wanting to see him, I was scolded severely. So, I hid in the shadows and watched him from a distance. From afar, I watched my father staring at the molten glass in the dark factory. There was a very small flower bed in the corner of the factory, where white star-shaped flowers bloomed. I remember vividly picking one of those white flowers and waiting at home alone. As I waited for Mike's return, confirming Joe had fallen asleep, the thought of my father suddenly crossed my mind. I should visit my father. I want to introduce Mike and Joe to him. I was curious about his reaction. As I was about to look up my father's contact on my mobile phone, an unknown number called. I answered the phone. It was cold. The voice of a woman I didn't know, the content, the air, everything felt cold. It was the news that Mike had suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. I wanted to rush there, but hesitated because Joe was sleeping. And that hesitation is something I would regret for the rest of my life. An hour after being taken to the hospital, I was informed that Mike had passed away. The doctor later explained it seemed to be a heart attack. The cause of death didn't matter to me. What I wanted to know was not why Mike died, but how Joe and I were supposed to live without him. I didn't cry even after Mike died. It was too sudden, and it didn't feel real. Without much thought, I blandly discussed funeral arrangements with the funeral home the hospital referred, and the proceedings went on mechanically. Joe, like me, probably couldn't grasp the reality. Sitting in the funeral home chair with the same expression as always, I looked boredly at the floor. A flamboyantly dressed woman appeared, and Mike's relatives started to argue with her after she approached them. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but she was Emma, Mike's divorced ex-wife, seemingly pressing about an inheritance or the lack thereof. Desperately, the relatives explained. "There's nothing like that." Amidst this, it felt like someone had asked what would become of Joe. Emma yelling caused quite a scene at the funeral. "I have no intention of taking Joe in. Just put him in some facility or something. Can't you see he's the one who's hurt the most? Can you not speak so thoughtlessly? Oh, are you Mike's new wife? I heard about you. He died shortly after getting remarried, right? What are you going to do in this situation? You have no connection to Joe at all. You can't possibly feel a bond after just 1 month of being a parent and child, can you?" As I continued to glare silently, Emma shrugged and smirked. "You seem young. You'd better make a choice you won't regret." With those parting words, she left the funeral home. Despite his real mother making an appearance for the first time in a while, Joe never once looked up. Everyone seemed to show sympathy for Joe, but their attitudes changed after witnessing the ex-wife's behavior. It's clear, being the child of such a mother, that child is beyond help too. Whispers began circulating that it's impossible to fight blood and how there's no obligation to raise a child not related by blood. Eventually, Mike's relatives started making selfish remarks. "Who's going to take Joe in? Your place, maybe? We definitely can't. Are you okay? Want to go to another room? Hey, you don't need to care for me. I can just go to a facility or something." Feeling a tightness in my chest, before I could even think, I was hugging Joe. I could feel the cold stares from those around us. Someone said loud enough for me to hear. "Raising a dead husband's child, are you out of your mind?" That's when my emotions surged. Stepping away from Joe, I clenched his hand and shouted at the relatives watching from a distance. "No matter what anyone says, I will raise this child properly. Calm down a bit. You have no obligation to do this. Honestly, it would be better for your future to just put him in a facility." "Shut up. Even if I'm alone, I'll make sure to raise him right." My defiant declaration was met with skepticism by everyone at the funeral home. What would become of Joe's life if I also disappeared from his side now that Mike was gone? I won't let him be lonely like I was as a child. I refused to let that happen. Then, a petite man sitting in the funeral home chairs coughed softly before walking up to me and looked intently into my eyes. It was Tom, my dad, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you saying you'll raise that child by yourself?" "Yes. I will make something of Mike's child. Don't joke. You have no idea how hard that's going to be." Dad suddenly pulled Joe's arm towards him and stormed out of the funeral home. Ignoring the other relatives' stunned reactions, we faced each other in the parking lot just outside. I followed and tried to pull Joe away from my father, but was pushed back with a strength that belied his small stature. "Your name's Joe, right? I'm your grandfather." "What?" "Yeah. How about it?" "You'd have to move, but would you come live with me? There's a factory near my house where I work. It's a bit noisy." As Joe struggled to respond to the sudden invitation, Dad turned to me with a sad look and said, "Nancy, come home." He suggested it would be sad and difficult for a child to be raised by just a woman, and that I should come back to my family home. After the funeral, the relatives stopped bothering me with unnecessary comments. It was as if they no longer wanted to be involved with Joe and I. I had been determined to raise Joe on my own, but it was just bravado. I was actually scared, anxious, and wanted to disappear. Joe hadn't cried since Mike passed away. And I hadn't yet felt the reality of his death, nor had I felt truly sad. But when Dad reached out to me with a look of concern, something inside me broke free, and I found myself crying in my dad's arms like a child. "Are you okay?" I felt Joe watching me as I continued to cry. After that, Joe and I vacated our apartment and left home. Dad came to pick us up, and we headed to my childhood home in his car. The scenery passing by the car window seemed melancholic, making me feel as if the memories I had with Mike were drifting further away. Upon returning home, a new life for Joe and I began. From his first day at the new school, something was off about Joe. I casually encouraged him, saying it's not easy to make friends right away, and sent him off to school as usual the next day. I started helping out at the glass factory my father ran. Inside the factory, a few male craftsmen were blowing glass to make dishes. My job was to inspect the finished glass products, picking up each item one by one and wiping it down with a cloth. I felt deeply moved, now as an adult doing the very work I was scolded for watching from a distance as a child because it was dangerous. Among the employees, there was a veteran lady who used to take care of me, and she happily remarked how the once little Nancy was all grown up. Though Dad no longer manufactures glass as an active craftsman, he was chatting with what seemed like a salesperson at a small desk near the workshop. I occasionally watched the glass blowing process from the corner of my eye while doing my job. The sight of the molten glass glowing orange in the furnace, being gathered on the end of a long rod and blown into a balloon-like shape, was nothing short of magnificent. I felt a slight desire to try it myself. But there was no atmosphere for beginners to experience glass blowing in this factory. The craftsmen worked silently, fluidly forming glass. Realizing that my father was the one leading these skilled craftsmen filled me with a bit of pride. At that time, I believe I was doing my best to adapt to this unfamiliar new life. And Joe probably was too. At a school PTA meeting, a nosy parent told me about Joe's situation at school. It seemed that the fact Joe and I were not blood related had already become a neighborhood rumor, and many students at his school were talking behind his back. Hearing this left me with a heavy heart as I started to walk, filled with various thoughts. I had been completely unaware of this, unable to even imagine it. It was something I should have considered, yet it had never crossed my mind. Mostly, I was overrun with regrets, excuses, a desire to escape, and the strong wish that Mike was still here with me. Returning home, I walked down the hallway and knocked on Joe's room door. "Joe, can I come in?" "Don't open it." Joe's somewhat hoarse voice came through. After taking a breath, I quietly said, "I'm sorry." "Joe, if you're okay with it, could you tell me about what's happening at school?" Joe didn't respond. I stood in front of the door for a while before eventually giving up and starting to prepare dinner. Day by day, conversations with Joe dwindled. Perhaps he sensed my forced smiles as I tried to inquire about school. He stopped sharing anything about his daily life. Eventually, Joe stopped going to school and began shutting himself in his room, living like a recluse. Though he was supposed to be at school in the mornings, it seemed he returned home after I left for work. Even at work, where I needed to concentrate, I found myself thinking about Joe, leading to mistakes like dropping freshly made glassware and getting scolded. Dad noticed my distress and offered to talk with me. However, I felt unable to share my troubles with my father, who had left me to focus on his work during my childhood. Yet, Dad kept calling me after work. "Talk to me if something's wrong," he would repeatedly say. Despite his insistence, I couldn't bring myself to confide in Dad. Each time he said to talk to him if something happened, it felt as though he was reminding me to protect Joe, leading me to ponder every night until I came up with an idea. One morning, I quietly handed Joe a mobile phone while he was eating breakfast. Seeing his suddenly brightened expression, I smiled a little. "I bought a mobile phone, matching with mine. If it's hard to talk about school stuff, you can text me. I might be able to help." "Okay." Joe carefully cradled the new mobile phone placed on the table with both hands. For a while, there was no contact from Joe. Considering I hadn't had time to teach him how to use the mobile phone, it seemed natural, until one day, I suddenly received a message. It was written that he had learned how to use the mobile phone from a kind employee at the glass factory, so he decided to send a message. Gradually, though sparingly, he began to share things about school through messages. As a mother, I wanted to do everything I could, but even after hearing about his school life, there wasn't much I could do to help, except to send encouraging words through messages. Still, I wondered if that had made Joe happy. After getting the mobile phone, he started going to school regularly and began to lead a normal school life. Even as a middle schooler, he went to school diligently without causing any major problems, and eventually became a high school student. By this time, Joe had stopped needing to communicate through messages and would talk to me face to face about his day at school, impressing me with his candidness. One holiday, Dad took Joe for a tour inside the glass factory. It was near the high-temperature furnace used for forming glass, an area I had been constantly warned as a child to stay away from because it was dangerous. Watching Joe being carefully taught and experiencing making a basic glass cup filled me with immense joy. From that day on, Dad spent his weekends and days off teaching Joe how to make glass. Dad's glasswork was artistic. It gave a special sensation, almost as if holding the drink directly. Time passed and Joe was in his junior year in high school. He wasn't interested in going to college, nor was he enthusiastic about getting a job, struggling to decide on a career path. The pressure from teachers and the inability to choose a post-graduation path until winter might have been partly my fault as his parent. During weekends, while I was busy with paperwork in a corner of the factory, Joe and Dad would take breaks together, sitting and staring at the heated glass furnace. Does it make sense to do manual work in an era when most factories are transitioning to machines for glass production? Joe asked Dad out of curiosity, to which Dad responded with a thoughtful look, crossing his arms. During his adolescence, it's unclear how Joe viewed Dad as a craftsman, but Dad seemed to ponder deeply over Joe's words. "People say our job is a dying industry. But we're still making a living out of it, which means there's value in it. There are people who appreciate the glass I make. Aren't you scared of going bankrupt?" "I'm terrified, to be honest. Bankruptcy is scary." I brought over cups of coffee to them, using the glass cups Joe had made as practice. Dad looked at Joe's glass and sipped his coffee, showing a hint of sadness. "When machines started taking over the glass industry, I was young. Nancy was little, and I didn't have time to play with her. Every day was filled with fear and no room for relaxation. I was desperate not to lose my mind from all the work. I wonder if Mom was lonely too. Probably. I hardly took care of Nancy. The thought that she had only me, her only family, scared me to death." Dad looked around the factory. "I lost my wife shortly after starting this company. But I didn't have the luxury to mourn. I needed money to raise Nancy. I had to keep the company going to support my employees. I was desperate not to make my beloved daughter sad." Dad. Pathetic, right? I was just a man who could only think of himself. Hesitantly, I reached out and touched Dad's hand. His hands were thin but large with long fingers. Hands that had crafted countless glasses. I knelt before Dad, eventually wrapping both hands around his. Something resonated within me. As if something was speaking to my heart. Thank you, Dad, for raising me. Didn't you listen? I didn't do anything. I was just desperately afraid of becoming hopeless. No, I knew you were. I knew Dad was working hard for me. I used to watch my father work hard from outside the factory, always finding ways to pass the time at the factory entrance. The handmade flower bed that changed with the seasons had been planted by someone. Then one day, when I was still young, one of my employees taught me who had been making these flower beds. I was told it was Dad who planted them. There was no way Dad could be interested in flowers. Surely, it was planted for me, thinking all girls like flowers. Now, no more flowers were planted there. When the star lilies that had sprouted from seeds carried by the wind bloomed around the factory, Joe graduated high school and started working at Dad's glass factory. Dad, who had been focusing more on paperwork, began working with glass again. The intricate glass works he created was purely magnificent, and both Joe and I respected him for it. As time passed, Joe married a woman introduced by Dad and built a duplex house. Insisting we live together despite my initial refusal. Dad was also invited to live with us, but he refused. I can't sleep unless I'm near the workshop. Eventually, when my grandchild was born and Joe was busy with work, I took care of the baby. Walking with the baby, I pointed out Joe working in the factory. Look, there's Dad. I tilt my grandson's face slightly to look at Joe. Without saying a word, the baby suddenly pointed at a small star lily at our feet. The delicate star-shaped flowers scattered around the factory, and as I set the baby down, it happily played with the flowers. What are you doing? That's dangerous. Joe came out of the factory, scolding yet looking at his child with joy. I hope to protect this small life that lies beyond this smile forever. You're the reason Mom took her own life. I want a divorce right now. I was dumbfounded when I suddenly received an angry call from my husband while having lunch outside. Actually, I'm having lunch with your mother right now. What? My husband said so and immediately hung up. Puzzled about why he said such a thing, I tilted my head in confusion along with my mother-in-law. However, after learning his motives, I decided to stand up and thoroughly confront him. My name is Mary, and I'm 28 years old. I've been married to my husband Daniel, who's 2 years my senior, for 3 years now. While supporting my husband who works as a company president, I also started working from home to help with the household finances. But it seems Daniel wasn't too happy about me working. You don't need to work, you know. That wasn't a word of appreciation for me trying to balance housework and a job. It'll look like I'm not earning enough if my wife has to work. I was disappointed with my husband who cared only about his own appearance. But to that, I was often uplifted by my mother-in-law, Susan. It's commendable that you're working from home on your own terms. And she often invited me out for lunch. I loved Susan, and despite how I felt about my husband, I was content with my life. Maybe I've been too lenient with Daniel. One day, while chatting in a cafe with Susan, she sighed. I spoiled him as an only child, but lately, he's been asking for money frequently. He says it's for the company, but it seems suspicious. I had no idea. Daniel never mentioned anything like that to me. But knowing my husband who likes to show off, even if the company was in trouble, he probably wouldn't tell me until it was too late. I sometimes regret how I raised my child. I worry if I've been a burden to you, Mary, and it keeps me up at night. Susan, you've done nothing wrong. No matter how hard you try in parenting, it ultimately depends on the child. I might not be convincing since I don't have any kids, but... No, Mary, I feel so relieved that you're trying to cheer me up. Thank you, as always. Seeing Susan's gentle smile, I strongly felt that no matter what happens, I'll always stand by her side. Perhaps disliking my connection with Susan, my husband gradually started to harass me more. What's with today's lunch? Strawberry jam on a sandwich? What? Isn't it your favorite? I only accept blueberry jam. Strawberry is too common and poor-looking for my taste. Daniel came home, yelling, and threw the lunchbox into the trash can. How could you? That lunchbox is getting old too. Buy a new one, will you? As he stomped into his room, a sweet perfume scent wafted from him. Daniel, you've been wearing that scent a lot lately. However, when I cleaned his room, there was no perfume bottle, and I suspected it might be a woman's fragrance. And then, without any notice, he started coming home late more frequently. Hey, I put extra effort into dinner today and waited for you. Didn't you get my message? Yeah, I know. But no matter how hard you try, your cooking can't beat a one-star hotel's. What? Did you eat out on purpose? Daniel, you've been acting strange lately. What? Shut up. Move, you're in the way. He shouted, pushing me aside and walking to the bathroom. That's when I caught that perfume scent again. I don't want to think about it, but it's clearly a sign of cheating. I was restless, and soon Daniel even started bad-mouthing Susan. That old lady, she should just give me the money without lecturing. Acting all high and mighty. Look who's talking. How can you ask Susan for money? That's none of your business. He seemed irritated and kicked the trash can to intimidate me. And usually, wives and mother-in-laws don't get along. It's not supposed to be that way. But Susan is such a good person. I have no reason to dislike her. My husband clicked his tongue in annoyance at my response. Then, Daniel started badgering me about Susan. Mom was complaining about you again. Says she hates going out with you because you're an inconsiderate daughter-in-law. No way! Susan would never say that. Considering my relationship with Susan so far, I couldn't believe Daniel's words. You really are naive. Why would she reveal her true feelings to a daughter-in-law like you? She's just been tolerating you. Watching my husband's exasperated expression, I began to worry if it might be true. Moreover, he told me Susan didn't want to see me and asked me not to contact her. I intended to trust Susan, but I thought it best to lay low for a while. Oh, right. Mom asked me to give you something. What is it? But when I looked inside the box Daniel handed me, it was rotten and emitted a terrible smell. I grimaced. The expiration date on the back was a month old. They were perishables. Wow, this is bad. Mom really hates you, doesn't she? My husband looked maliciously pleased. During this time, the perfume scent only grew stronger, and I endured a hellish 3 months. One day, unable to bear it anymore, I decided to call Susan. Tomorrow, I'll finish work by noon. Would you like to meet up? I'd like to have lunch and talk a bit. Yes, that's fine, but are you sure you want to see me? What do you mean? I only understood the meaning behind Susan's words when we met the next day in a private room at a restaurant. It turns out my husband had also lied to Susan, telling her I'd been speaking ill of her. Of course, the story about Susan complaining about me was also a lie by my husband. I thought so too. But I was worried maybe it was true. These past 3 months have felt like I was dead inside. I also thought there's no way you would say such things, but just in case it was true, I was avoiding going out with you. So what's with the rotten perishables? What? What are you talking about? Seeing Susan tilt her head in confusion, I realized that was also a lie by Daniel. While Susan and I, feeling distrustful towards Daniel, were discussing our next steps over lunch, my phone rang. Huh? It's Daniel. I excused myself to Susan and answered the call, only to be yelled at by my husband. It's your fault. What? Why are you yelling at me all of a sudden? You bullied Mom into taking her own life. I want a divorce from you right now. Confused by Daniel's words, I was stunned. Actually, I'm having lunch with your mother right now. What? Surprised, my husband immediately hung up. What was that about? What happened? Before we could even ponder, Susan received a call. Hello? Oh, Daniel? What's up? Susan quickly switched her phone to speaker mode. On the other end, my husband's voice lowered, as if he was trying to find out something. Mom, are you with someone right now? To that, Susan winked at me and responded. Oh, I'm just out shopping with a friend. Is something wrong? Hearing this, my husband muttered. She lied, that liar. Then, he blurted out something outrageous. Mary is cheating. You know what? I'm divorcing her, so you must never trust her again. What? I gestured to Susan to keep talking. Quietly nodding, she pretended to be fooled and continued to draw out my husband's motives. Finally, the reason behind Daniel's suspicious behavior became clear. After ending the call with my husband, Susan's face looked devilish. I was filled with anger too. Susan, let's teach that man a lesson together. When I got home, my husband was already there. Oh, you're home early today. Yeah. Despite his inner tension, Daniel's attempt to appear calm was almost comical. But I decided to take the initiative. Today, I got a weird call around noon. It might be my imagination, but the voice sounded like yours. Is it some new scam or something? What? Really? Be careful not to get fooled, okay? Hearing my words, my husband seemed relieved, thinking he'd gotten away with it, and reverted to his usual demeanor. Where were you anyways? If you're a housewife, you should act like one and stick to house chores. Okay, I hear you. Then the doorbell rang. I'm doing the dishes, could you get the door, Daniel? Fine. Reluctantly, he opened the door and I heard him scream. Standing there was Susan and another young woman. Emily! What are you doing here? Oh, I just invited your new bride over as a mother. She's young and cute, isn't she? Mom, don't say anything. Daniel gestured for Susan to be quiet, but I watched from behind with a cold gaze. I'm sorry to say this, but both Susan and I know about your affair. I watched Daniel gasp. Please, come in. He welcomed the woman named Emily. How long have you known? Sitting across from us, Daniel looked up with a fearful gaze. Daniel, every time you came home, you smelled of perfume. Didn't you notice? Or is there something wrong with your nose? Tired of feeling uneasy, I decided to investigate my husband's mistress. Disguising my hair and outfit, I frequented a cafe near his office and followed him and his mistress to a hotel, capturing the moment they entered. I was so excited that I couldn't sleep that night. How did you find her contact information? You thought you were careful by setting your phone's lock to fingerprint recognition, but that's easy to bypass when you're asleep. Don't I have any privacy? Be quiet. Susan, usually calm and gentle, raised her voice, silencing her son. So, I contacted Emily, and Susan went to pick her up. I forced my husband's chin up as he sat with his head down. He couldn't move, just looking into my eyes. You mentioned your intentions over the phone to Susan, but could you share them with me too? I intended to smile, but perhaps my eyes weren't smiling, as my husband trembled. Reluctantly, he began to explain his suspicious behavior and the purpose of his call that day. I plan to divorce you, take the alimony and shared property, and then remarry Emily. So, initially, you intended to make it look like Susan took her own life and blame me for it, leading to a divorce. Is that correct? He nodded in small movements. It's surprising he thought such a lie about Susan's death would work. I guess he was that into his mistress. But when I told him I was having lunch with Susan, he was so caught off guard that he hung up the phone in shock. Still unrepentant, my husband, thinking of his next move, quickly contacted Susan. When Daniel came to me with his plan, I was utterly disappointed. Susan pretended to be deceived and extracted the story from him. Mary cheated, so I'll take the compensation money and the shared property. That's what he told Susan. And he added the following. I've already found a new partner to marry as soon as we divorce. That partner turned out to be Emily, now sitting in front of us, pale-faced. Why won't you take my side? What do you mean? You always supported me. In elementary school, you always defended me when I did something wrong. But you changed ever since I married Mary. How far back are you living in the past? And I regret spoiling you too much when you were young. Daniel thought that his mother had changed because of me, and had been lying to both of us so we wouldn't see each other. Disappointed with her son, Susan sighed deeply. I never thought you could be so selfish. I'll end it here. I'm cutting off your financial support. What? You're kidding, right? Actually, Susan had been financially supporting Daniel's company, and his success as a president was largely due to her. However, after becoming suspicious of his constant requests for money, Susan discovered he was using the funds for his mistress and not the company. I no longer consider you my son. I'm disowning you, so leave this house. Daniel's face turned increasingly pale. It was only natural, since the house we lived in was in Susan's name, and he had always relied on his mother. Seeing him look at me in panic, I pushed the divorce papers towards him. Sign here, please. Here's a pen. Enjoy your life with your mistress as much as you want. At least let me off the compensation money. Don't joke with me. How dare you claim Susan took her own life? I said so and slapped his face. What? If there's no money, there's no benefit to marrying an old man like you. The mistress said so and slapped his face too. Daniel, holding his face, teared up and collapsed on the floor. By the way, Emily, I'll be seeking compensation from you too. What? Why me? You can't just meddle with someone's husband and get away scot-free. But she too slumped powerlessly to the floor, and together, Susan and I kicked both the Daniel and Emily out into the cold. After divorcing my husband, I demanded $20,000 in compensation. He was kicked out of the house owned by Susan, his financial support was cut off, and his company went bankrupt. Now homeless and penniless, Daniel is apparently living on the streets. Of course, I also got $10,000 in compensation from the mistress. Susan and I remain close, and after my divorce, I moved in with her. Our bond deepened even more. And we now live freely and happily together, just the two of us. I will be erased soon. A letter from my sister-in-law Elizabeth, who had taken her own life, arrived addressed to me. It came a week after she had passed to the other side. Despite her will already being found, what on earth was going on? I couldn't understand it all. But when I saw that letter, my hands started shaking with anger. This can't be forgiven. The letter ended with the words, "Report to police immediately." Little did I know what would happen next. My name is Jessica, I'm 28 years old. I live with my husband Paul, who is 5 years older than me. Both of us worked at different companies. Paul had a sister named Elizabeth, a very gentle person who, and for me who had no sisters, was like a real sister. And Elizabeth treated me like a sister as well. My sister-in-law was unmarried, and said she had no boyfriend, but she confided in me alone. Actually, there's someone I've been interested in lately. He's a wrestler and is very strong. Elizabeth said with a happy smile. And this was a secret kept between just us. My father-in-law was a practicing doctor, but passed away due to illness 3 months ago, and after that, Elizabeth started living with my mother-in-law. But then, my mother-in-law also passed to the other side. The cause was due to an overdose of medication, likely obtained from my father-in-law's clinic. After my father-in-law passed away, they were considering closing the clinic since my parents-in-law were known as a loving couple to everyone. The will created on the computer mentioned my mother-in-law couldn't bear my father-in-law's death. But my mother-in-law was a person who always enjoyed writing and had a beautiful handwriting as well. So I felt it was odd that her last message to this world wasn't handwritten. But my husband simply accepted it. She chose to go to the other side, so it's not strange she did something different. She must have been that lonely. Indeed, thinking of my mother-in-law's immense sorrow for the love of my father-in-law, I oddly found myself agreeing with Paul. But, amidst such interference, there was a mountain of things left to do. Because my mother-in-law had hardly touched anything inherited from my father-in-law, she had left behind a vast fortune. Paul would find time to immerse himself in the inheritance procedures. In contrast, my sister-in-law began sorting through my mother-in-law's belongings, one by one. And from this time, I started to notice a change in Paul's behavior. When he's home, he would stay in his room, and when he had work, he would come home late. And then finally, he started frequently coming home in the morning without telling me at all. "You've been acting strange lately. What on earth are you doing?" "It's none of your business." "But your mother just passed away, and you're not coming home until morning." "Shut up. Don't preach to me." My husband stormed out the door and became unreachable, not returning until the next evening. Given the gravity of our marital crisis, I confided in my sister-in-law about the situation with him. "I'll subtly ask Paul what's been happening. Let's work together and resolve this." Her encouragement somehow bolstered my spirits. Yet, what followed was unimaginable. The very next day, my sister-in-law suddenly left this world. The cause was the same as my mother-in-law's, an overdose. And she too had left a note. "I will join my beloved mother on her journey." But the idea that Elizabeth, who had been so positive just days before, taking her own life made no sense to me. "Something is definitely wrong. Let's get the police to investigate. Making a fuss won't bring Elizabeth back. You just do what you're supposed to do quietly." Despite my inability to accept, the funeral wouldn't wait. With a heart full of sorrow and unresolved feelings, I proceeded to make the arrangements. After Elizabeth's funeral, exactly 1 week later, I was set to return to work. Arriving at the office, there was an envelope on my desk. It seemed to have arrived while I was away. "Who could it be from? What? This can't be." I was shocked to see the sender's name. It was a letter from Elizabeth, who had passed away. Panicked, I opened it. "I will be erased soon. Report to the police immediately." This sentence caught my eye. And as I continued to read, my hands began to tremble. "The hidden truth. I can't believe this." Gradually, I felt a strong anger building inside me, my head heating up. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I resolved to put an end to it myself. But I still lacked the crucial piece to do so. Thus, I sent a letter to someone, quietly waiting for the right time. 2 nights later, I visited my parents-in-law's home and hid myself. Then, a dark figure quietly entered my sister-in-law's room. I followed the dark figure and then turned on the light. "It's so bright." The person rummaging through Elizabeth's desk was none other than my husband, Paul. "What are you doing here? And in the dark, too. It's as if you're searching for something, hoping not to be found. Don't say something stupid. What are you doing here yourself?" As if I was the one doing something wrong, he pointed his finger at me. Ignoring my husband, I pulled out something I had prepared from my bag. "Did you happen to read this letter?" It was a letter I had written, pretending to be my sister-in-law, addressed to myself to arrive at our house. It read, "Inside my desk, there is evidence of my brother's crime. Jessica, take this and report to the police." I had anticipated my quick-thinking husband would guess a letter from my sister-in-law contained something serious and would read it without permission. "Seeing this, you came to destroy the evidence, but unfortunately, what's written here was a fake I created to lure you in." "What are you talking about?" "I was just cleaning up." "Really? Then can you say the same after seeing this? I took out the letter I had received from my sister-in-law a few days ago. Elizabeth knew you were responsible for sending your mother to the other side. That's why she pressured you to turn yourself in, right? But you took care of her too. Hearing these words, my husband instantly turned his face away. I pressed on, presenting the content of the letter to Paul. While sorting through things, Elizabeth found your mother's diary. It seems to say you jumped on some shady investment. So what? That's something I have no recollection of. Lies. It's all written here. I took out the diary my sister-in-law had enclosed in the letter. According to it, Paul had been pestering her to invest the family's fortune. Despite her refusals, he was persistent, causing her great distress. Unable to confide in anyone, my mother-in-law poured her anguished heart into the diary. Look here. As long as I'm in my right mind, I'll never let the fortune my husband left to be used for such dubious purposes. I want to live long, for the both of us. It says so, right? So what if it does? The evidence here made Elizabeth realize you must have been the one to end your mother's life. However, no matter how much my Elizabeth searched, she couldn't find definitive proof you sent my mother-in-law to the other side. As a last resort, Elizabeth tried to get a confession out of Paul. But my sister-in-law thought, being capable of such acts towards his own mother, he might not spare her either. If anything happened to her, she entrusted me through the letter to report my husband to the police. Hey, all of that is just made-up stories. After all, there's no conclusive evidence I sent those two to the other side, is there? You rummaging through Elizabeth's belongings right now is evidence enough. Calm down, will you? Saying this, my husband left the room and returned with coffee he had brewed in the kitchen. Here, drink this and calm down. Paul offered the coffee with a nonchalant demeanor. But this was exactly my aim. Surely you've mixed something strange in large amounts in this. Indeed, no decisive evidence of his crimes was found, as my husband said. However, it was almost certain Paul was responsible for their deaths. And the deciding factor for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's journey to the other side was medication. I figured if I made enough noise, you'd surely try to do the same to me too. If you handed me a drink or something, I thought it would surely contain something suspicious, becoming irrefutable evidence. My husband, clearly unsettled by my deductions, clicked his tongue. Basically, you jumped at that get-rich-quick scheme because you were squandering money on a woman, right? I had long suspected our marriage had grown cold and wondered if Paul was having an affair. Since a lot had been going on regarding my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, I had left it alone, but now I decided to thoroughly investigate Paul's background. Then, I found an unknown credit card in his room and discovered a history of purchases of expensive women's brand items on the statement. And I found this as well. I pulled out a club hostess's business card I found in the inner pocket of his suit. I went to the club and met the woman named on this card. What? You met Nancy? Since she wasn't looking for any trouble, she told me everything just like that. She said you two were already in a relationship. According to Nancy, Paul was the one who persistently approached her. However, for her, Paul was just a good target, entering into the relationship only to get money from him. Knowing Paul was married, Nancy demanded compensation from him, which he complied with. But she's been feeling bothered by you for a while. She said she was going to change clubs to cut ties with you. Too bad. What? But I spent so much on her. Tears welled up in Paul's eyes as he hung his head. Paul, infatuated with another woman, was now depressed because his affair partner dumped him. How dare you act like this in front of your wife? I couldn't help but feel another wave of anger. Then suddenly, Paul lunged at me. Give me the coffee. He tried to snatch the coffee, which likely contained a large amount of medication and could serve as evidence of his crime. Stop it. Let go. Just give it to me. I struggled fiercely, but the difference in strength meant it was only a matter of time before the evidence ended up in his hands. But then, someone intervened to help. "Get your hands off her!" Easily knocking Paul down and pinning him to the floor. "Who on earth are you?" "He's Richard, the man Elizabeth loved. He worked at the same place as my sister-in-law and had attended Elizabeth's funeral. Before Elizabeth passed away, she had mentioned about Richard. There's a wonderful man with a wrestling background." Seeing Richard, a solidly built man, holding back tears in front of Elizabeth lying in peace, I instantly knew he was the man my sister-in-law had loved. Approaching him, he opened up about his feelings for Elizabeth. Richard, too, couldn't believe my sister-in-law had taken her own life, and we exchanged contact information, promising to share any new information. In order to carry out this plan, I had asked him to hide just in case. "Damn it! You tricked me!" My husband struggled, and with my help, the two of us managed to subdue him. Thinking he couldn't escape, Paul suddenly changed his tune. "Look, Richard, can't we talk this out? If you let me go now, I might even share a bit of my family's wealth with you." "You open your mouth and that's what you suggest?" "Jessica, you too. You know your husband could be criticized by society." Appalling. Did you really think I'd stay by your side for life? You really are full of yourself. You and I are over. When I mentioned breaking up, my husband's face turned pale. "What? I'm going to be abandoned by my wife and get locked up? No, I don't want that." Paul struggled fiercely again, but Richard restrained him. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me." "Never. You took the lives of your own mother and sister." Thinking of the two who had gone to heaven, I couldn't let Paul get away with this. I clenched my fists and glared at my husband. "You're the worst kind of human being. I will never forgive you, Paul. Serve your time quietly behind bars. Just be prepared never to see the outside world again. My life is over." Crying out, my husband was immobilized by me and Richard. We then called the police, and soon after, officers arrived and took him away. Paul was later interrogated and seems to have confessed. A large amount of medication was detected in the coffee, sealing his fate. Aware of the severity of his crimes, he seemed to have resigned himself to his fate, losing all energy in life. As for myself, I divorced Paul and demanded a compensation of $30,000 from him and $10,000 from Nancy. And as for Richard, he said he is going to move on with his life. After all the procedures were completed, I moved to a new home, ready for a fresh start. I've been assigned new tasks at work, and despite the challenges, I feel the most fulfilled I've ever been.